This video is sponsored by Boxu. Now, if there's one thing that people who follow this channel know, it's that I'm a big fan of boxes. And that remains true for Boxu. With this service, every month you get a themed Japanese box of sorts that is full of goodies and treats for you to enjoy. This month's box is themed after Sakura and comes with a whole bunch of cute pink treats, and it works pretty well. Kirby, pink, I'm trying. My favorite thing in this box was easily the mochi. I never had mochi before, but if mochi were a person, I would let it do unspeakable things to me, like take me out to dinner and hold my hand, because it's great. It's so good. Regardless of the mochi specifically though, this was just a fun thing to have arrive at my door, and I had a wonderful time opening it up with my wife, looking at it. She loved how the box looked. She kept saying that it's super cute. You can be the judge of that. I think it's pretty cute. But yeah, it was just fun to go through it with her and try different snacks together. So use my code on the link in the description to support the channel and get 10% off your own delicious snack journey through Japan. I played every mainline Kirby game in preparation for the release of the brand new Kirby game, and you know what that means. It's time to rank and review every one of these bad boys, see which one's the best, see which one's the worst, and let's just jump right into it. Going back to Kirby's Dreamland is strange, because it's missing many of the key features that nowadays make a Kirby game a Kirby game. In particular, copy abilities. Those are nowhere to be seen, and that means that throughout this whole adventure, you're going to be able to float and fly and suck in enemies and keep them down, but no copy abilities. Nothing to spice up that combat throughout the whole adventure. Needless to say, that means that this game is far more limited than later entries, which, to be fair, is kind of to be expected. I mean, this is the very first one. On top of that, you also can't run, so yeah, another example of this game being more limited. But like I said, Kirby can still float, so that key component of them is still there. But this design decision presents a major challenge to the creators. How do you make a platformer with some measure of challenge where the player character can fly over almost everything that would typically be considered a challenge in a typical platformer? The answer is that sometimes you don't. And that's fine. This game is designed to be simple and easy and straightforward. However, that's not to say that this game is thoughtless. Now, there are plenty of flying enemies that chase Kirby, or cannons that shoot up there so you aren't entirely safe, or tight corridors so you can't abuse that flying mechanic. On top of that, Kirby's sucking and blowing abilities do a good job of balancing things out. After all, when Kirby's got their mouth stuffed with baddies, they can't fly, which puts you in increased danger during combat scenarios. This way, there are loads of times where what would normally be your main mode of traversal is stripped away from you during combat, leading to more tense encounters. Even though all the stuff I've mentioned so far leads to a decidedly well-designed game, it's not all that memorable. It's incredibly short, I finished it in about 20 minutes, and even then there's some repeat content, in particular these 4 bosses that you have to fight twice. Now, this isn't the end of the world, but when a game is this short, I'd hope it's at least dense with novel and unique concepts throughout. To be honest, there are plenty of other Game Boy platformers I'd rather play again over this one, and that had plenty more content in the first place. To me, this feels like a good proof of concept that can be built upon further to create a more fully fleshed out experience, but a proof of concept all the same. Overall, I didn't dislike my time with it, but I also didn't particularly enjoy it. It was just there. Kirby music. You know what I'm about to get into. Now, this isn't really exactly related to ranking each and every game, but if I don't talk about it now, it's gonna keep coming up. These games, they have jams, they have bops, they have boops, they have beeps, they have things that get me excited and elevate these games to the next level because the music's always great. You can't have a Kirby game without solid tunes. And this is true for Dreamland. I mean, Dreamland has some of the absolute best chiptune bops that can be found on the Game Boy. Like sometimes when I go back to Game Boy games, I begin to understand parents worldwide a bit better when they used to say, "Hey, turn that down." But with Kirby, nah, I don't want to turn it down, and you shouldn't want me to either, Mom. It's great. And again, that will remain true for every single Kirby game I'm going to talk about, so I might as well get it out of the way now. Kirby's Adventure is where boys become men and puffballs become pink. Really, this is where Kirby comes into his own, because now this little pink puffball of goodness can suck down their enemies and copy what they can do. That's right, folks. They're already here. The copy abilities. It's actually crazy how far they pushed this concept for the first game to utilize it. I mean, there are 25 abilities. 25! Sure, some of them are gimmicky or really only used in very specific circumstances, but still, there are a ton of these, and it gives the player so much agency and variation and choice for how they want to tackle different obstacles. I can't think of another NES game that provides the players with this many options for how they want to play. The sheer amount of content this crams into the game, especially when we consider its time of release, is really impressive. Probably in large part because of these copy abilities, the game also has an increased emphasis on combat. There are loads more enemies and mini-bosses and big bosses that you're going to be fighting throughout the adventure. And it's made all the more exciting by the fact that when you see a new one, there's a good chance that you're going to discover something new for you to use as the player. Sure, some of them can be cheesed incredibly easy, including the bosses, but hey, you know what? I honestly don't care that much because there's so much variety here and so much experimentation and just a sense of play when you're going into these battles. Plus, regardless of its difficulty, that ebb and flow between platforming and combat adds something into the mix that definitely pumps it up when compared to Dreamland. Overall, the level design has seen improvements too. The extra screen real estate provided by the NES is put to great use, with longer levels that Kirby can blast through and run without worry that some enemy is gonna pop out of nowhere and smack into them. Beyond that, just like with Dreamland, there are plenty of airborne enemies, cannons, and tight corridors that do a good job of counteracting some of Kirby's more OP abilities. Beyond that, certain sections are designed around Kirby's abilities themselves, and it's incredibly satisfying to see how Kirby's abilities play off of the environment. It gives a sense of very cohesive design where this isn't just some platformer that Kirby was plopped into. These levels were designed with Kirby in mind. This game also puts a bit more emphasis on story than your typical 2D platformer. Now, I'm not really looking for some sort of deep Shakespearean tragedy from my 2D side-scroller, but hey, you know what? If there's something interesting here, I'll take it, and it definitely elevates the experience. I mean, among Kirby games, there are plenty where I'm not even going to mention the stories because there's nothing that stood out to me, but here, there is something. And that something is Meta Knight. See, he pops up from time to time throughout the adventure, sending baddies to fight Kirby, and it creates a bond between the player and him, a rivalry of sorts. And that rivalry comes to a head when you go to fight the boss, and there's the sword, and he's waiting for you to pick it up, and once you do, he comes at you, and you're on equal footing now, and you get to just thrash him if you're good enough. It's immensely satisfying, and it gives that little narrative element that takes a boss battle that would normally be fine, and elevates it a bit. Again, this is just another thing about the game that's pretty great. Speaking of pretty great, though, we've got the aesthetic. As far as I'm concerned, this is absolutely one of the best looking NES games out there. To be honest, that's kind of to be expected, considering that this game was released well into the NES's life cycle, and after it was basically dead, and the SNES had taken over. SNES, that's right, folks, I called it SNES. If you're a fellow SNESer like me who says it like that, just comment down below and support, baby. We need to stand up for each other. People have made fun of me for that in the comments. Regardless of terminology, though, the use of bright colors and the comparatively detailed and well-realized backgrounds and some of these more impressive technical moments add up to make this, as far as I'm concerned, the pinnacle of what the NES is capable of aesthetically. Unfortunately, though, that does come at a cost, and that cost is performance. This game really just chugs sometimes. There's some serious slowdown. I mean, the spark ability, I wanted to use it, but I'd sometimes kind of avoid it because when you go at it and you really start electrocuting everything, you're also going to fry your NES. Regardless, though, that combination of an increased focus on story, amazing graphics, and an outstanding aesthetic lead to a world that's just an absolute joy to exist in. Even with all these positives, though, there is some room for improvement. In particular, as much as I love the copy abilities, it would be nice if the game was a bit more balanced around that. Right now, they can just kind of snap it in half with ease, and I'd like to see that addressed in future installments. Additionally, most of these levels started to bleed into each other for me by the end. There wasn't enough of a unique factor to them, enough of set pieces or gimmicks that I could really keep in my brain, so they all felt rather samey, or at least a lot of them did. Now, none of that is to say that this game's bad. Nah, even outside of considering its time of release, it's a really fun time today, and when I take that into account, this game's supremely impressive. This one was a lot of fun, and it's easily going above Dreamland. Let's cut to the chase. With Kirby's Dreamland 2, the Kirby series regresses significantly. Now, to be fair, this is kind of to be expected because Kirby's Dreamland 2 once again releases for the Game Boy. However, even if I can keep that in mind and go, you know what, I should be fair, that didn't stop me from being disappointed that this is such a major step back in so many major ways. For example, no more running. And I get it, I get why you can't run, but still, it felt so much better to be able to bolt through levels in Adventure than it does here, where the movement's just kind of sluggish and controlling Kirby doesn't feel nearly as satisfying. Speaking of Kirby's controls, though, there are only 8 copy abilities left. I don't have enough fingers, but still, only 8. However, there was an attempt to make up for all the things we've lost by introducing something new, and that something new is the animal buddies. These guys they're pretty cute. They fit in with the Kirby world well, and I would have believed that they were here from the start. I like them. Other than maybe this one. I don't know if I trust the fish. Regardless though, these guys exist for another reason too, and that's to allow for more gameplay variety, because each one of them has a unique interaction with each one of Kirby's copy abilities. So it's not like there's only 8 of them. There's more like math. On paper, this leans into some of the strengths of Adventure with an increased focus on exploration, discovery, and experimentation that I really appreciate. So if I appreciate it, what's my problem? What's my issue? Well, mainly the level design. There are a lot of flat levels that don't contain any meaningful hazards or obstacles for Kirby to overcome, meaning that you can just kind of blast through them, and that's only made easier with some of these animal buddies. I mean, Koo is an absolute monster. You cannot stop this guy. And that doesn't lead to exciting levels. It leads to things where I go, hey, I guess I can see that there's work done there, but I can also just fly over it. So, adios to all the levels. I guess I could see someone having fun with this if you enjoy the idea of just breaking a game in half, but I found it really boring and bland. For me, the absolute worst moment of this comes in the final world, because there you play through 3 levels, and they're whatever. I didn't really enjoy them. They're pretty typical Dreamland 2 levels. But then you go to the next 3, and they're basically just mirrors of the previous ones. So not only did I find these levels boring, but the game just outright reuses them. Come on. I know I'm stupid, but even I noticed this sort of thing, so I hate to think how smarter people than me felt. Then there's the way the game focuses on exploration. Basically, in each of these worlds, there's one rainbow drop for you to collect. If you get all of them, you unlock the final boss and the true ending. But you need to have all of them. It's not enough to just have a couple or a few. Every single one. And these guys, they can be pretty hard to find, and they involve using a specific animal buddy at points and a specific power-up combination to get them. And I didn't find that fun. I found it kind of obtuse. Like, I'd finally hunt one down, and I'd get there and go, oh, that's a shame I needed this power-up. And I don't even really know which power-up it is. It involves some experimentation that way and replaying levels, and since I wasn't enjoying the levels in the first place, I didn't have much of an interest in replaying them. So this brand of exploration absolutely did nothing for me. My conclusion about this game is probably pretty obvious by now. I didn't like it at all. I had next to no fun with it, and, you know, as much as Dreamland 1 wasn't memorable, it didn't frustrate me. I didn't have a bad time with it. I had a bad time with this game. I think it was a major step down from the first game, and even worse, it was an absolutely massive step down from Kirby's Adventure. For that reason, this one is quite easily going to the bottom of the list. Kirby Superstar isn't just one game. It's 8 games in one, baby! So let's talk about all 8 of those games, man. Wow. But not really, because some of them aren't really all that fleshed out. In fact, there's only really 6 that I think are worth discussing. So let's jump into those ones. Actually, though, before we get into the modes themselves, there is something else I want to discuss that affects the whole game, and that is the awesome way that Kirby Superstar beefs up the copy abilities, because so many of these, they're just better now. A bunch of them have these varied, robust movesets, and it leans into one of the biggest strengths of one of Kirby's best gimmicks, and that is the extra sense of player control, the combat, the exploration, the discovery. It's all there with these copy abilities. As for the modes themselves, though, well, first, there's Spring Breeze, which is basically a remake of Dreamland 1. but not the whole game. Certain sections have been left out, like that boss fight thing where you gotta fight all 4 of them again, and I'm happy they just axed that. No need for that to be in the game. However, the key difference here is that the robust copy abilities are here, and you get to use them to just absolutely snap this game in half. As much as I didn't find that fun in Dreamland 2, I find it a lot better here for a couple reasons. The first one being that this is just one of many modes in the game. And I think it serves as a good introduction to the new kind of Kirby found here. I mean, for people who have already played Dreamland 1, this is a way of saying, hey, you can do so much more now. You're so much better, so much more powerful. And challenges that could have stumped you before, well, don't worry about them now, because you are ripped, baby. It's a playground for players to experiment with these new copy abilities, and I think that's a pretty intelligent decision and a good thing to add into the game. It also helps people look at it and go, hey, Kirby's looking a lot better now. This is the best this guy's ever looked, and yeah, that works well too. That's a good idea. Really, there was nothing all that exciting here, but the fact that I enjoyed my time with it stands as a testament to how powerful these copy abilities are and how much fun they inject into the game. Second, Gourmet Race. I don't actually know why I included this one. Like, I guess I felt like I should talk about it because it's here. Basically, you run, you race King DeDeDe, you gotta collect food and get to the end and beat a score. You can do that a few times. It took me like 8 minutes. That's it. It was fun. Probably never do it again, but it was fun. You know what? This one is for all of you Gourmet Race fans out there. I know you're watching, right? You love Gourmet Race, and you're thinking, if this guy doesn't talk about it, I'm gonna be straight pissed. But you don't have to be, because I did. This one was for you. Third, Dynablade. Here the levels feel a lot like those found in Kirby's Adventure, though a little bit longer. Overall, it's a mode that I enjoyed playing for the 20 minutes or so that it took me to complete it, but it didn't really have anything that was all that memorable to me outside of the final boss fight. Fourth, the Revenge of Meta Knight. And fortunately, this is where I get to start talking a little bit more, because this is the first mode in the game that stands out to me and that I think is something really special. Here, you wreak Meta Knight's Halberd while you blast through it with all of Meta Knight's soldiers talking about how much destruction you're causing and just panicking that things are going so poorly. It adds this extra narrative component. It makes the player feel like an absolute just unit, just a big Chad who's destroying everything. The music? It's amazing. The level design, it's tight, dense, and fun. The aesthetic, give it to me. The narrative component, as I already said, that's there. The set pieces and boss fights, memorable. The sense of speed and urgency, you bet your butt. Plus, you end it off by getting chased by Meta Knight while the Halberd blows up. What more do you want? What more could you possibly want? Fifth, Milky Way Wishes. This one's a little different from the previous modes I discussed because unlike what you do there where you swallow the enemies and copy their abilities, this time you can't do that. This time you need to use Copy Essences Deluxe to permanently gain those abilities, and then you can select them, and as you go, you just become more and more powerful. By the end of this, Kirby is a god, and the world is theirs to decide what to do with. This, combined with the ability to go through basically any of these levels in any order, gives the adventure an increased sense of replayability, as well as a better sense of progression. It also has a cool narrative component with Marks, who betrays Kirby and becomes... However, one big thing held this mode back for me. Repetition. A lot of this mode is just pulled from the previous modes. That's not to say that it doesn't have unique level design or ideas, but the aesthetics, the boss fights, the enemies... There's very little new here, and as such, it didn't stand out to me all that much. For some, this might make it feel like a culmination of everything they've experienced thus far, the final sum of all of it. But to me, I was a little bit disappointed. It's not the worst thing in the world, but this game's pretty short, so I was hoping to be surprised at the end, rather than reminded like, hey, you were there, don't you recognize it? And I go, yes, I do. That's pretty cool, but not as cool as something new. Still, the strengths of this game mode easily outweigh the negatives. Finally, we have the Great Cave Offensive, and even though this isn't the last mode, I left it for last for a simple reason. It's my favorite. This is easily the best of the bunch as far as I'm concerned. In this mode, you go through one large labyrinthine level, getting treasures and trying to get the highest score possible. Throughout, you'll encounter loads of unique aesthetics, enemies, and boss fights. On a really basic level, I simply think that Kirby's abilities lend themselves well to a game that's more focused on exploration. After all, Kirby is able to float and fly, meaning that you're able to go vertical more often, that it makes it easier to craft levels that have a greater sense of up, down, left, right, different corners and nooks and crannies that you can dig into to discover things. This is just a different type of challenge that rewards attention to detail and fully understanding the level's layouts. Beyond that, this was a tight, tense game mode, with plenty of little nooks and crannies to dig into, along with plenty of moments that surprised me. However, there is still some room for improvement. In particular, I would have liked a map of some sort. It doesn't have to be too detailed or give everything away, but just some method that I could see where I've already been. Because sometimes I'd go into a room and there was 2 doors, and I'd go, I don't know which one of these I went into. It all kind of bled together at a point. And that got pretty frustrating, and that's why I didn't go for every single treasure. Still, regardless of these quibbles I have with it, this was an incredibly fun game mode, and easily my favorite style of Kirby thus far. I hope that they'll return to this type of thing again in the future, lean into it, and make it even better. But then there's the obvious question. How does Kirby Superstar hold up as a package? And as a package, it's pretty freaking good. I had a good time with this game, I had fun, but admittedly, I wish that some of the game modes had a bit more meat on them. Like, out of the 6 that were even worth discussing as far as I'm concerned, like 3 of them had enough to really make me go, yeah, that was cool, I like that. As such, for a game with 8 games in one, it was a bit light on content. And it felt like they could have done more with each of these copy abilities and this really robust system that they put into place. It's kind of like I got a taste of great food, but then I left the restaurant still hungry. Regardless of those complaints though, the strengths here are undeniably strong. There are great game modes to discover here, a ton of fun, even if it is a bit on the short side. As such, it's easily going above Adventure for me and way above the other 2 games I already discussed. After playing Kirby Superstar, there was an obvious question I had to ask myself. Where do they go from here? How do they make Kirby even better? And the answer that Kirby's Dreamland 3 threw back at me was an answer that I didn't think anyone would be brave enough to say. And it said it without any qualms, without any hesitation. I won't. You know what though? Let's just start with the positives. This game has a wonderful aesthetic, the sort of painterly, soft watercolor look to it, and it's a joy to look at it. It's beautiful, and it fits the world of Kirby exceptionally well. That, combined with the music, leads to an experience that I can definitely see someone just chilling out to, vibing, relaxing, having an all-around great time. But, yeah, those are all the positives. And I'm not just saying that to be a dick. Genuinely. Those are the only positives I have about this game. Once again, we've got less power-ups, more animal buddies, more doodads to collect to unlock the final boss. And unfortunately, each of these ideas is... First off, like I said, far fewer abilities. And the ones that are left aren't anywhere near as robust or interesting as they were in Kirby Superstar. Things have been pared back significantly. They're basically just one attack each again, but there is an attempt to add in some variety because each of them, once again, has a unique interaction with each animal buddy. However, unfortunately, I didn't think that the animal buddy stuff really made up for that. Like, they weren't unique enough or interesting enough to even come close to what Superstar was doing. But that isn't what makes me dislike this game so much. Now, what makes me dislike this game is that Kirby's Dreamland 3 is probably great for those of you who don't enjoy playing video games, because the game practically plays itself. Now, that was me being a dick. Whether I had an animal buddy or not, I could just dash through these levels without a worry in the world, flying over everything, tanking hits with my massive pool of HP, and that was it. I barely feel like I experienced anything here because it is so easy to not engage with it. In particular, Ku? Ku is once again an unstoppable maniac, and it's even worse. Now you just gotta tap the A button really, really fast, and this guy will fly. He'll fly over everything. He'll eat those hits. He doesn't care. But even if I left behind those things, even if I decided in my head, hey, I'm not going to break this game in half today. The level design doesn't stand up to the test. There are way too many repetitive hazards, slow-moving obstacles. Kirby theirself just moves like he's in molasses. This guy is eating way too much. There are also all these collectibles that you got to get to unlock the final ending. And here they've really focused on that element of the game. Now it's not just that you need one from every world, you need one from every level. And there are a variety of ways that you're going to find these collectibles. Sometimes you need to find items that are scattered around a level, or you need to complete a mission like not stepping on flowers or watering flowers or purposely destroying another type of plant. There are little mini games you gotta play, and those mini games, they're annoying, okay? Like, they're memorization based. Some of them, they have nothing to do with platforming. So when you get stumped on one of these, I mean, I didn't. Of course I didn't get stumped on this. My memory's great. My mom always told me so. But for those of you who did, it feels bad when you keep playing the same mission again, over and over and over again, just because your memory wasn't quite good enough. And beyond that, when you fail, you don't just get to retry. You gotta replay the whole level up to that point. The worst example of this is this level, where there's just multiple branching paths and a slow auto-scroller, and you just simply need to guess the right path forward. That's it. Just guess the right path forward. Then some of these are incredibly obtuse, like I don't know how you would figure out that you need to do these things to get these collectibles. I get that part of the challenge is supposed to be figuring out what you need to do based simply off the picture shown, but sometimes they're just way too vague, and it leads to a lot of frustration when you got to keep replaying these levels over and over and over again. Maybe I'd be a bit more forgiving of some of these missions if you didn't need to collect every single collectible. Like if you just need to get 3 or 4 or something like that out of every world, and then you could fight the final boss. But this game is still all or nothing. So even if there's 1 in each world, or 1 in the whole game that you're really stuck on that you can't get, it's like there was no point getting any of these unless you found that process intrinsically satisfying. And I definitely didn't find it intrinsically satisfying. To some, this game is relaxing, but to me, it felt like I was stuck in traffic on the freeway for hours. I really didn't like this game at all. This game is absolutely not for me, and it easily is going to the bottom of the list. Kirby 64 says goodbye to a lot of things from previous Kirby games. Animal buddies? See ya. A whole bunch of these copy abilities? Bye-bye. Robust movesets? Nope. In their place, there's something else though, and that thing is math. On paper, copy ability combinations are so cool. I mean, the idea of experimenting with each of these, discovering what they do, I really like it, and discovering some of these was admittedly quite cool. Like the one where Kirby's got a double lightsaber, he becomes Darth Maul and tears through everything. Give it to me. But then there's other ones where he rubs his head, like that kind of thing. I didn't really get that one. There was a few of these I didn't really get, but you know what, still? I respect the idea. But would you look at the time? I don't have a watch, but it's complain o'clock because I have some problems. Because some of these abilities just absolutely decimate the game. I mean, right off the bat, I got double fire and I just blasted through. I jumped, pressed the attack button, woo, jump, press the attack button, woo, and I was able to tear through the vast majority of this game like that with very little pushback. Just like Dreamland 2 and 3, these levels aren't properly designed around Kirby's abilities, and that leads to a lot of challenge-less, mind-numbing, boring stages that I played without basically thinking. I mean, the designers eventually just say screw it in this one, and they put a reskin of the first level in the game as the first level in the final world of the game. Plus, Kirby is still moving quite slowly, just like in Dreamland 3, but I guess they're a little bit faster here still. Slow. Plodding. Even when you're running, doesn't feel quite right. But let's talk about some good things. The aesthetic of this game is wonderful. I really enjoyed looking at it. It's one of the best looking N64 games as far as I'm concerned. The colorful backgrounds with a good sense of depth, the varied environments, just looking at Kirby, it all adds up to make an experience that's incredibly easy on the eyes, and I just enjoyed looking at it quite a lot. I also like the way that this game occasionally uses the third dimension to make levels feel a little more cinematic or cool, just help them stand out from the crowd. In particular, they do a good job with this during some boss fights where they'll attack from the background into the foreground, or you're running in a circle around them. That's cool. I like that type of thing. It's nice that even if this is a firmly 2D game, they use that 2.5D element, the strength of the N64, to allow for some slightly different gameplay styles. Then we have the collectibles, because much like in Dreamland 2 and 3, we got some things to collect. This time it's the titular crystal shards. In theory, I really like these. They encourage the players to explore a bit more, to lean into that element of Kirby's design, and they also allow for unique challenges crafted around them, like needing to have a certain power-up to access it. That seems like a decent idea on paper. But still, I wasn't a big fan of these. Just like with the previous collectibles, it's all or nothing. You need every single one to get to the final boss and the final ending. As such, I didn't do it because I wasn't collecting all these, and some of them are really, really goofy. Like, I don't know how you're supposed to figure out that you need to climb up here with the rock rick. I played Dreamland 3 and I would never figure that out. So I feel really bad for the kids out there who had to get one shard and could never find out how to do this. And before some of you in the comments say, hey, I was a kid and I figured that out. Okay, I'm glad you're smarter than the rest of us. Then those ones where you need specific power-up combinations. Well, obviously you can't know you need them until you get to that point in the level. And since I didn't enjoy a lot of these levels all that much, I wasn't interested in playing through them again just to get to this point with the right power-up, opening up the way and grabbing it. However, this game isn't without its enjoyable moments. As it went along, its level design got a bit more tight, challenging, and varied. In particular, level 5-4. I really enjoyed that one. It has this cool aesthetic with the factory, a bunch of different set pieces, a variety of gameplay sections, a good dose of challenge, and overall, it's just designed around Kirby's abilities. Like you couldn't fly through everything because you were in tighter corridors, with lots of enemies packed in there. I had a good time with it, and I just wish that more of the game was designed like this. Then the final boss. Compared with the rest of the game, this was surprisingly a challenge, a nice little challenge. Like, you gotta quickly grab out the things that he pushes out and use the right color to hit him. It led to a fight where I had to memorize each of the patterns, and there was a lot of different ones, a lot of unique moves, and act fast. I enjoyed it quite a lot, and even if it didn't get me screaming about how hard it was a welcome challenge. But these couple good moments don't make up for the rest of the game. As it stands, it wasn't terrible or anything like that, but there was very little particularly memorable about it, and way too much of it you could just blast through and finish without much of a thought. Still, I guess I'll remember this game for its pleasant music, its comfy aesthetic, and its power-up combination gimmick, which is a really cool gimmick. I would love to see that come back in full force someday. Other than that, nothing much here for me. However, I'm still going to put this one slightly above Dreamland because of those moments I remember and the cool ideas. Did you like the Great Cave Offensive in Superstar? Well, I certainly hope so, because with the amazing mirror, that mode has been stretched out over a full game. Well, actually, that's a bit of an oversimplification, because outside of a brief introductory section, you can basically do anything in this game in any order. So long as you defeat each of the bosses and get the mirror shard they're carrying, you're good to go. I love this focus on exploration for all the same reasons that I already mentioned with the Great Cave Offensive, so I won't repeat myself too much here, but yeah, it's great. That verticality that you get from Kirby is put to great use here. Plus the process of finding and defeating each boss, plundering treasure chests, and connecting the whole map made for an immensely satisfying gameplay loop. And since the game is so open, it really feels like you're discovering something, because there isn't just one path to get to the end. There's basically infinite ways you could go about doing this. It's going to differ from player to player depending on where you go first, what you prioritize, and just how you want to go about this whole game. Also, I love the aesthetic of this game. The GBA and DS Kirby titles generally look fantastic with these almost painterly backgrounds and a sprite for Kirby that, in my opinion, is my absolute favorite for him so far. Additionally, there's a ton of visual variety between each of these areas, they're immensely colorful, and the pixel art is gorgeous. Overall, this is simply another Kirby game where it's just an absolute joy to exist in this world because it's so pleasant and cute to look at. Basically, in terms of appearance, This is easily my favorite mainline title so far. However, there is some room for improvement. I wish the game had a bit more of a detailed map. It was very hard to keep it in my head where I could find certain copy abilities, and if I had just been able to mark that down myself, that would have gone a long way in making the process of exploring and discovering a bit more streamlined without taking anything away from the sense of discovery. The final boss is tedious? Not very fun. You just gotta fight this guy 4 times, and I think there's some variation between each fight, but not enough that I was able to actually notice that while playing. It just felt like the same thing over and over and over again. And the last thing, this is a shame, but the robust copy abilities from Superstar still aren't back. Still, as much as I've complained here, the core of this game mode is exceptionally strong. I just had so much fun exploring, and I'm sure that comes down to my particular playstyle. I guess I just enjoy games that have a focus on that sort of thing, and I thought this one had it in bite-sized pieces and small enough chunks that I was able to keep most of it in my head, even if there were a couple moments where the map could have been laid out in a more streamlined fashion. So yeah, I can notice the issues, but when I was actually playing the game, they didn't matter to me. I mean, I beat this whole thing in one sitting, and I was never bored. Out of all the ones I played so far, I also want to replay this one the most because there's just so much room to try different paths to try to beat this as fast as possible. Really, at the end of the day, it took my favorite mode from Superstar, added to it, built upon it, and cranked it up to make it even better. For that reason, this one's just going a hair above Superstar for me, and I think that's a hot take, but I don't really care. I liked it a lot. It was great. This is a great game. Kirby Squeak Squad has the pleasure of definitely being another Kirby game. See, this one takes a little something from many of the games that we've already talked about. There's level design that's incredibly reminiscent of Adventures. There are treasure chests that contain rewards, kind of like the Amazing Mirror, and you need to collect some of them to open the path forward, kind of like Dreamland 2, 3, and 64. Then there's the aesthetic, which is basically ripped directly out of the GBA titles. But there's an obvious question we gotta ask. What does this game have to call its own? Well, you can play around with Kirby's stomach, which definitely feels like a way that the DS touchscreen would be used in 2006. Here, you can store items for later and even combine some of them to do special things, like get elemental swords. Although I didn't realize you could do that because when I tried to combine things, it just made a random power-up. But it is something you can do. But there is a problem here because this is where you also store the main collectibles in the game, the treasures. So you're going to need room for those, and it results in this awkward process of flinging things out of the stomach, accidentally grabbing the wrong thing that you don't want, having these mini Kirbys that are just a big pain in the butt, and I never wanted them. Just get rid of them. I don't need them. It was a real hassle to organize and manage this whole thing. It also upsets what little balance there is in a Kirby game because now you can have so many different ripped abilities stored inside you. So if a boss knocks one out, well, it barely matters because I got 4 more ready. As far as finding the treasure chests themselves is concerned though, you'll find these scattered throughout the levels, so it means that you need to explore a bit more than you otherwise would. While a lot of these are totally fine, there are a good number that I really disliked. There are some where if you don't collect them in time, you got to replay the whole level. There are some where the path branches in the level, and if you don't happen to choose the right one, well, gotta replay it. There are certain levels that barely have anything in them other than the treasure chest you need to grab. And finally, there's the Squeak Squad treasure chests. With these big guys, you'll grab them, and then the Squeak Squad comes out and they start chasing you towards the end. On paper, this could be a really tense, interesting combat scenario or a race of sorts to get to the finish. And sometimes it is just that, but in many cases, it isn't at all. These encounters are repeated so many times, and by the 5th time you see one of them, it's kind of like, there you are again, buddy. I'm not really scared of you. And the race to get to the finish isn't a big deal either. It usually takes barely any time. And even when you do end up having to fight these guys, they're mostly these huge pushovers that you barely need to worry about. As such, I can see the potential in this system, but I feel like most of it wasn't tapped into at all. All this is to say that I didn't really like the way the treasure chests were handled, but you know what? It's not really a huge deal because you don't need them. So in the end, I just decided to grab the ones I came across and ignore the others because whatever, the game is allowing me that freedom to play the way I want to play, and I really appreciate that. Wait a minute. You're telling me that I need 5 specific treasures to open the path forward to the other worlds in the game? What? How was I supposed to know that was coming? If the game's going to pull something like this, it needs to communicate to me how important it is to grab these specific treasures. And beyond that, why is it specific treasures? Why wouldn't it be that you need like a certain number of all of them? This really left a bad taste in my mouth, because then I had no idea where they were, and I had no interest in going back to find them. Overall, a lot of Squeak Squad is derivative of older games, and its new ideas, they aren't great. As such, this led to a game where the good parts were just things I had experienced elsewhere and I'd rather experience in those other games again, while the bad parts were uniquely frustrating and really ended up ticking me off. All in all, it's just an incredibly uninspired title, especially coming off of the unique ideas found in the amazing mirror. For all these reasons, this one is going just below Kirby 64. Kirby's Return to Dreamland is a fantastic return to form for the Kirby series. Sure, I really enjoyed the amazing mirror, but that's undeniably not the experience that most Kirby fans have come to expect from a Kirby game. Meanwhile, Squeak Squad was, well, I just finished complaining about that one. The first main thing that this game brings back that the Kirby series has been missing is the in-depth copyability system from Superstar. However, here, there are even more in the mix, more unique moves, and it's just been made better. So that sense of variety and experimentation and fun to be had with the combat, it's been pumped up to the next level. On top of that, this game makes better use of these abilities through challenge sections built around them, where in order to get the top level, you need to complete these within a certain amount of time. So this game is rewarding mastery with each of these copy abilities in a way that no other Kirby game has before, and it helped me understand more of what I could squeeze out of these and each of their individual moves. Basically, it did a great job of communicating to the player how robust and fantastic this system really is. Then there are the great boss fights with lively animations and loads of attacks and patterns for you to memorize and react to. While these are far from white-knuckle challenges that made me want to break my Wiimote in half, they did provide me with some really interesting fights that rewarded an understanding of each of the attacks and made me adapt accordingly. Sure, some of them can be cheesed really easily. I mean, the leaf ability in particular just decimated some of these guys, but they still stand as a massive improvement over the bosses and fights found in previous Kirby games. All in all, this is easily the most well-rounded combat that we've seen thus far. Plus, the final boss is absolutely fantastic and serves as a wonderful exclamation point to this adventure. This is the first one where I really felt compelled to engage with the boss rush mode. It's really a great time, and the game's progression system is similarly great. See, much like with Dreamland 2, Dreamland 3, 64, and Squeak Squad, there's collectibles throughout the levels that you can grab. This time, they come in the form of gears. However, unlike in those games where it was very all or nothing, or it wasn't that obvious what you were actually doing with these things, this game clearly lays out what they're for and what they'll get you. While this is an incredibly simple thing, and to some it might not matter all that much, to me, it really gave it a great sense of progression, and it encouraged me to hunt each of these down because they help unlock the challenge rooms I love so much. But that progression is found in other parts of the game too. Eventually, when I seemed to finish each of the game's worlds, I was satisfied and happy with the adventure I had played. But then you realize that there's another world, and then another world, and then a bullet hell section, and then the actual final boss. It gives the adventure a great sense of, well, adventure. This idea that there's an actual narrative in place and that we're going to fight this guy that we've been helping and all that jazz, and that there's more levels than I initially expected. The world expanded outward as I played this game, and it made it immensely satisfying when I realized, no, it's not over yet. There's still more left to enjoy. It also helps that the levels never diminish in quality. This game is consistently great from beginning to end. So yeah, the level design, it's awesome. I really love it, and it's easily my favorite of the linear style of Kirby thus far. Through the whole game, new challenges and obstacles are thrown into the mix, and each of them is given ample room for development in subsequent levels. Overall, these are dense levels that are packed with content, while still keeping that comfy Kirby charm that I've come to love. However, the designers found a really smart way to include deeper challenges in this game, and that's with the gears. See, there are a variety of times where to get the gears, you're going to need to complete an optional, more difficult challenge. These can be as simple as carrying a key above Kirby's head that takes away the flight ability, so now the designers can craft a platforming segment with a more limited moveset in mind. Or sometimes you'll need to race through a certain section before a Waddle Dee falls off a cliff, gating you from getting the gear that you wanted to collect. Then there are the rift sections where Kirby's ability is taken away from them entering into it, so now you need to run away from this wall that's coming towards you and complete the challenges set out before you in a way that, again, the designers can more carefully design around because they know that you won't have some game-breaking combat ability thrown into the mix. All in all, this led to some of the most challenging and varied design in any of these Kirby games thus far. Then aesthetically, the game is beautiful. The backgrounds are exceptionally detailed, even though most people probably won't take the time to really soak them in. But once I noticed that, yeah, I just stopped and I would look at them sometimes and appreciate all the things they added to this well-rounded aesthetic. Sure, the level themes are by no means super unique or anything like that, but they feel like almost the pinnacle of each of these aesthetics. Of course, the wonderful music adds to this too, but I already got the music segment out of the way. Also, we've got the most well-realized co-op yet, where you can play with up to 4 different players. I didn't do it, but if you enjoy that sort of thing, hey, it's here for you. Simply put, I think this is a great game. It has the most content out of any Kirby game thus far. It has wonderful boss fights and a more in-depth narrative, fantastic music, fantastic encounters, a fantastic aesthetic, fantastic basically everything. It takes the best elements from prior installments in the series, expands upon them, and crafts an adventure that was through and through just a wonderful experience. You've probably already figured this out from how much time I've spent gushing about it, but this is going to the top of the list. Kirby Triple Deluxe is very much Kirby's Return to Dreamland 2. The copy ability system, the enemy encounters, the boss fights, the level design, all of it is very, very similar. Which I'm not complaining about. I mean, Kirby's Return to Dreamland was blessed, so I'll take more of that any day of the week. However, it does have a couple things to call its own, mainly the 3D. Now, I know a lot of you heathens don't bother using this thing, or you say, oh, it gives me eye strain, which actually I'm not going to make fun of you for. I'm being kind of a jerk. If it gives you eye strain, I'm sorry, okay? I hope your eyes don't hurt. I won't make fun of you for that, but I really like the 3D. I've always loved it. The extra sense of depth it gives the world in these games. Yeah, baby. I like it a lot. I'm out here with the slider cranked all the way up because I love that extra sense of depth. And this game puts it to great effect with various sections of the level where you gotta go to the background or foreground where there's a bunch of things popping out at you. I really, really appreciated it. Beyond that, the levels have a certain reality to them that makes them really cute. That's kind of a weird word for it, but I can't think of a better one. Because there's all these different mechanics of the levels, all these different obstacles and things you gotta dodge, where there's an actual mechanical reason that you can see behind why they're functioning the way they are. Like, there are a whole bunch of moments where Waddle Dees are throwing things at you or making these contraptions work, and it adds sort of sense of realism that's really, really charming and cute. It basically just makes the world feel more like a world. Additionally, there are some different aesthetics that we didn't see there, like this cake and dessert area or this sort of funky, creepy carnival thing. Plus, the pastel color palette lends it its own style and vibe. As for the level design, the extra ones are some of the best ones out there. You unlock these by getting all the various sunstones scattered throughout the levels in the world, and this serves as a culmination of everything in that world. You'll see every obstacle you encountered thrown into one gauntlet that you've got to get through. Then there are the bosses, which, what can I say, they're very similar to the ones found in Return to Dreamland, and that's great. They put the copy abilities to great use, and it was a lot of fun to fight them and learn their patterns. However, this game does take a couple steps back from Return to Dreamland for me. First, There's the Hypernova ability, which I'm not really a fan of this. I can see why some people would enjoy it. The cutscenes that play when you use it are pretty cute and entertaining, but ultimately, I'd rather be playing more of the game rather than watching it happen. These sections ended up feeling quite samey and plodding to me. And there was something similar in Return to Dreamland with the Ultra and Monster abilities, those sorts of things. But there, they were a bit faster paced, I thought, and they always ended off with a little riff section that I knew I would enjoy, so I was a bit more tolerant of them there, I guess. Plus, the game's final extra level is just a rehash of all the Hypernova content I'd already played, which is the exact opposite of what I was hoping for after getting all the Sunstones. Speaking of the Sunstones, I've got a little nitpick with those too, because some of these levels feel a lot longer than those in Return to Dreamland, and that revealed an issue to me. You can't leave these levels and keep the Sunstones you already got. If you missed one, you gotta replay the whole thing, find it, and get to the end. This was actually the same in Return to Dreamland, but I barely even noticed it because those levels were generally quick and snappy. That still absolutely shouldn't have been a problem here. I mean, Kirby 64 got this right with the fact that you could collect a crystal shard and leave, so I don't see why we were taking steps back like this. But this is made even worse, where some of these levels are like 10 minutes long. That might only be one, the final level, but still, when I missed one there, I went, oh crap. I don't really want to go through the whole thing again, especially if I might miss it for a second time. Then there's my biggest issue, the final world. While a lot of this was great, there were also plenty of anticlimactic moments. In particular, 2 of the levels are mostly dedicated to rehashed boss fights, and then one of them is basically all a Hypernova level. So yeah, a big step down from the way Return to Dreamland ramped up toward the end. Regardless of these relatively small complaints though, I really had an enjoyable time with this game. Like I said, it was basically Return to Dreamland 2, and that right there is fine by me. Still, it didn't have the challenge levels or quite the same sense of progression, and I had those other issues that I already discussed. So this one's going to be going below Return to Dreamland, but also below the Amazing Mirror, because I can see myself returning to the Amazing Mirror a bit more than I would this one, since if I get the hankering to play Triple Deluxe, I think I'll often end up just going to Return to Dreamland instead. Ever since the dawn of time, theologians and philosophers have asked a question that is burned into their very souls, into the core of their being. What would happen if we put Kirby in a mech? And the answer is as obvious as you might have expected. You get one of the best Kirby games ever made. Kirby Planet Robobot takes a lot about its design once again from Return to Dreamland. However, it does have plenty of its own ideas thrown into the mix, in particular, the mech. This thing is absolutely ripped, and I think that the designers finally have nailed that sense of destroying and decimating the levels that they tried to get in so many other games. Because here, you'll actually morph and contort the level using the Robobot's unique abilities. Plus, it probably works because there's more to it than that. You'll use its unique mechanics to solve puzzles, to traverse parts of the level you otherwise wouldn't be able to collect the code cubes. As such, it feels less like the Robobot is something that is always just breaking this game in half, and more like it's just another tool in Kirby's arsenal that you'll sometimes need to use. Also, it has some limitations that Kirby actually doesn't have, like now, when you're in it, you can't fly infinitely. Beyond that, there are a couple shoot-'em-up sections and racing parts littered throughout, so that's another part of this game having a bit more gameplay variety than previous installments. There's pretty much always some new or fresh idea to experience here. Then we have the aesthetic, which manages to evoke nostalgia while still feeling new. Because this is easily the most that a Kirby game's narrative has had an impact on its environmental design, with the evil Haltman coming in and twisting the world to fit his ends by roboticizing it. This way, the grass levels aren't just grass levels again, and the tree boss isn't just the tree boss again. They're these weird mechanical abominations that remind the player what they're working towards and what they're trying to fix. Also, just look at the Waddle Dees. They're in mechs, and they're driving cars, and they're following traffic laws. I love them so much. Shame I gotta eat them then. Meanwhile, collecting this game's collectibles, the code cubes, is less of a hassle than it was in Triple Deluxe because now the levels are mostly shorter. There aren't really any long ones that stand out in my mind. Of course, the game still should have given players the option to leave with new code cubes they've collected, but when the levels are shorter, it is less of an issue for me. Last but not least, the final boss. This thing is so cool, and it's a callback to so many different elements from the Kirby series, but again, twisted into this new thing, so it doesn't feel like a simple rehash, or one of those moments I've talked about a couple times now where you go, oh, I noticed that. No, this is something old and something new. It's the proper way to do fan service. Overall, this game is great fun and easily one of the best ones thus far. It successfully retains many of the strengths of Return to Dreamland's design, while adding in its own ideas, a new and better gimmick, a better sense of aesthetic variety, a tighter narrative cohesion, and really, just improving upon so many things that were found there. Still, it's really hard for me to choose between this one and Return to Dreamland, because Return to Dreamland, well, at the time it felt more novel, I guess, but more importantly, it had a better sense of progression with those additional levels I didn't expect, and also the challenge rooms that I loved so much. So at the end of the day, even though this is so close to being a tie, this one's just going a hair below Return to Dreamland for me, but above The Amazing Mirror. Well, folks, here we are, the final one, Kirby Star Allies. This game is, I have some mixed feelings about it. Overall, this game's level design is significantly pared back from the previous 3 games. In fact, a lot of it reminded me of Dreamland 2 and 3's design. Though it isn't as extreme as it was there, the pace is slower, the levels are incredibly easy to exploit, and the new ideas here don't measure up to the ones they're replacing. Also, having 3 CPU players with you at once makes for really bland, boring combat sections where often I barely felt like I had to do anything. Now, your obvious response to that might be, well, don't have the CPUs with you then. Play alone. But that doesn't really work since you're often going to need them to perform certain attacks or carve the path forward. So the game's constantly encouraging you and basically necessitating that you have them with you. Part of this is that different abilities are needed in combination to complete puzzles. But what's even more ridiculous is that these guys will often just do them for you. And sure, the puzzles aren't anything too exciting. They're basically 1 + 1 = 2 most of the time. But still, having them just finish them for you, it's really odd. Now, this all sounds exceptionally negative, but as the game went along, it did improve. The real problem is that the game doesn't progress fast enough. That by the time the levels have improved and gotten complex enough to be interesting, the game is already almost over. Like, even if I can definitely recognize that it improved, that I was having more fun by the end, I still can't think of anything that I actually remember from this. It all kind of bleeds together, except for one thing, the final boss. The final boss is awesome, with the sense of scale and craziness that got me all hyped up and ready to go. Actually, additionally, I did have some fun playing around with the copy ability combinations where you can take a physical ability and an elemental ability and combine them for unique effects. That was pretty cool, even if it was never used all that well. But that's it. That's all I have to say. I barely had any feelings about this game. It was just bland and boring and exceptionally disappointing, coming off of these 3 really strong installments right before it. At this point, it doesn't feel well designed for single-player play or cooperative play. It's in this sort of weird space in between where you can't play alone because you need to have partners with you, but if you have the partners, they'll run through a lot of the game for you. This actually isn't the end though, because we still have guest star Star Allies Go mode. In guest star Star Allies Go mode, you'll actually end up not doing anything that's really worth discussing, because it's just the main game mode again. This really, really confused me because I saw people, they were raving about this. They were saying that it was really good. What do you mean? I'm confused. I think that there are unique level sections attributed to some of these Dream Friends, which is a neat concept, but they don't mean much to me when I need to dig through so much of the stuff I've already played again to get to them. I wasn't interested in this game the first time. I'm not interested in playing through it again just to get a tidbit of new content and a little bit more fan service. I guess I can see this mode appealing to the most hardcore of Kirby fans, those who really love every little reference, every little callback, and just want to play around with these unique movesets. And I can respect that, but it didn't do enough for me. Speaking of the Dream Friends though, their moves are awesome. There's so much to them and they could easily star in their own platforming adventure. Really, they make the copy abilities look primitive by comparison. Still, I wasn't able to appreciate them all that much in this mode because there's so little here that actually taps into the potential offered by these movesets. But that's where Heroes from Another Dimension comes in. As far as I'm concerned, this is what the whole game should have been like. It would have given its own identity, and I would have loved it. But what we have here is still a lot of fun. In this mode, there are a bunch of rooms or areas built around specific Dream Friends or copy abilities. You'll need to know the ins and outs of each one if you want to collect each of the hearts scattered along the path and unlock the final boss. And because there are these hearts, because they're optional content, the designers likely felt more comfortable crafting more difficult challenges. So now the game isn't anywhere near as mindless. There's actually some pretty tight platforming segments, and it also won't alienate the younger players or those who are less experienced, because if one's too hard, they can just ignore it and move on to the next one. For this albeit brief mode, I got a taste of Star Allies' potential. Unfortunately though, it only comprises a fraction of this game's total playtime. It took me about an hour and a half or 2 hours to complete. As such, even though I did enjoy it, there isn't all that much to dig into here, and it definitely wasn't worth the price of admission. To some, this is a great celebration of Kirby's history, and I respect that. But to me, it felt like a rehash of ideas that were better elsewhere. A boring slog a lot of the time. A game that took from some of my least favorite places in the franchise. And I was left exceptionally disappointed. At the end of the day, it's a game that was fun for a couple hours, but that I have no desire to ever play again. Still, because of Heroes from Another Dimension, this one is going to narrowly beat out Kirby 64. Well, that's it. We've ranked and reviewed every mainline Kirby game, and here is the final tally. Do you agree with my list? Do you disagree with my list? Do you feel somewhere in between? Leave comments down below. I'd be curious to read your thoughts on that, and to be totally honest, the engagement on a video like this is also really appreciated. Also, if you enjoyed it, like the video. If you didn't, dislike the video. If you want, subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it, and I'd be happy to have you on board. Also, if there's enough interest in this video, I'm planning to review The Forgotten Land once that comes out and add it into my ranking. Additionally, thank you to all my patrons whose wonderful names are scrolling on by. Aren't they beautiful? I think so. I think they're pretty lovely. Either way, thanks for watching. Here's some other videos you can check out, and I hope you have a great day.